Good evening all and welcome to day 4 of Cryptid Week. I have a thrilling collection of cryptid stories for you to enjoy tonight. Before we begin though, I would like to gently remind everyone that YouTube is putting a lot of focus and energy on shorts right now. So if you want to keep supporting your long form creator friends like me, your sub and bell icon and a odd like here and there would go a hell of a long way to keep us running. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This all happened in Hungary back in 2002, out in the middle of Eastern Europe. My father spent most of his life deep in the forests around our home, a passion that started when he was just a small boy wandering off on his own. According to my grandmother, it was almost normal back then for him to go missing for 2 or 3 days at a time in their local forest, even at the age of 6, as he started walking around enjoying nature without a care in the world. So after she and the family realized they couldn't really stop him from hiking out like that, it became a regular thing for him to disappear into the trees whenever the mood struck. That love of nature stayed with my father through his whole life though, never fading no matter how old he got or what else pulled at him. He went out hunting and camping regularly even now, knowing those woods like the back of his hand from years spent out there alone. So I am telling you all of this to give you some context about the man, since he spent his whole life surrounded by nature, could recognize every sound that came from the trees, and knew every animal at a glance without ever second-guessing himself. He told me this story for the first time 10 years ago, sitting us down one evening with a serious look on his face that I hardly ever saw. As a skeptic back then, I didn't pay much attention to it at first, since I believed it to be a tall tale he came up with to entertain or scare us kids around the fire. That was when he started retelling it, from time to time over the years, yet every detail stayed exactly the same, and I noticed he got visibly nervous during its retellings. So I began to take it seriously after a while, realizing this was not like him at all since he was not easily scared of anything in the woods after a lifetime out there. That was when I felt like I could trust him completely with this, and started to believe his story came straight from something real that he lived through. He always stuck to the facts without embellishing, which made me listen closer each time he brought it up. Now for the story. There was one time he spent the night out in the forest with his dog, a dachshund he had trained specifically for hunting through the underbrush and brush. So he was walking down a road that split the forest into 2 parts, following the path under the stars with his dog trotting ahead as always. That was when he realized his dog had stopped walking dead in front and ran back to sit straight behind his legs, ears flat and whining low. Next, my father looked up and saw someone coming out from the trees on one side, figuring at first it was a person on the back of a horse, since he caught the reflections of an eye glinting in the dark ahead. So he stood there watching closer, but then realized those eyes sat way too high up off the ground to belong to any walking person he knew from around those parts. That was when he saw the eyes were bigger than any normal human's eyes, about the size of tennis balls, he said, and spaced out really far apart across whatever head carried them through the shadows. I heard him describe how the creature seemed to look around at first, since the reflections disappeared for a moment then reappeared, as if it turned its head side to side scanning the road. So when it saw my father standing there, or at least acknowledged his presence in the moonlight, it fixed those huge eyes right on him without blinking and came out from the trees slowly. Next, according to Dad, it was levitating clear as day, hovering at least 50 centimeters off the ground, with no legs or feet touching down anywhere. He also noticed it made no sound at all. It was completely silent through the crisp night air, and the skinny frame was wrapped in some kind of robe that hid everything else from view. There was nothing else to see besides those eyes, which appeared to be a mix of red, brown and grey in the faint light, though he admitted the moon and stars provided only glow, so he wasn't entirely sure about the exact color. He compared it straight to a Dementor from Harry Potter, floating eerily with its hooded shape gliding along. The creature did not confront my father or come any closer to where he stood with the dog trembling behind him. It simply levitated straight down the path, passing him by at a steady pace, then disappeared into the woods on the other side of the road without turning back once. So this part struck me as weirder than it sounded at first, since that side of the forest was just a narrow strip, 3 or 4 meters wide, thick with trees and undergrowth, but right after sat a solid concrete fence, separating it from a factory beyond. That was when my father turned back right away, not wanting to risk running into it a second time out there alone in the dark, with only his dog for company. So he spent the rest of the night camped in a very different area further down the main trail, away from that road and whatever crossed that evening. Next, in the morning light, he came back to check the spot carefully, looking for any trails or signs the creature left behind, but found no footprints or broken branches, nothing to show it had ever been there at all. I lived in a quiet village in the south of Germany, right next to a rather large forest filled with hiking and biking trails that would meander through the trees for miles around our area. When I was little, it would be either my aunt or my dad who took me there for walks almost every second day, which made the outings a regular part of my childhood, which I looked forward to each time. So it's fair to say, I knew the area, and that turned into a habit for me to keep going on walks through the forest later in life as well, even when I had grown up. A few months ago, all of that changed one night. I usually went on walks with music during daytime hours, keeping the paths bathed in sunlight where everything was familiar and safe. That was when one evening during a full moon, with clear skies overhead, I felt a little brave and bored, so decided to go for a stroll after dark for the first time in a long time. I grabbed a torch just in case the path got a bit too dark, picked up my phone to keep the music going, and headed out the door into the cool night air alone. I set off down my usual route, seeing the moonlight filter through the branches as it lit up the trail enough to see where I placed my feet. I was halfway through the trail when I came across a little bridge that led deeper into the forest, a spot I had crossed hundreds of times before during daytime walks with no trouble at all. One of my songs faded out slowly at that moment, and before the next track could start playing through my earphones, I heard the most blood-curdling scream that I had ever heard in my entire life echo sharply from the trees ahead. I took my headphones off quickly, thinking maybe a boar or another forest critter had stepped into a trap, since that kind of thing happens from time to time around here, with all the hunters in the area. Then I took a step closer, moving half over the bridge to get a better look into the shadows beyond, and I heard it again. This time closer, even more piercing through the air. I turned on my torch, my hands were shaking slightly from the shock, and shone the beam around the trees, and that is when I saw it clear as day in the light. A snow-white, skinny face with pitch-dark eyes, looking straight at me from between dark trunks nearby. I had never felt this horrified in my entire life up until that point, as my insides told me if I took another step forward across the bridge, something terrible would happen to me right then and there. I did not care what might come after me or block my way. I turned around immediately without another thought and ran the other way home, straight through the moonlit path. Next, I felt a considerable feeling of dread press in the back of my neck the whole time during that run. That was when I burst through my front doors finally, slammed it shut, and locked it tight behind me, then leaned against the wall inside to catch my breath after the panic. So I stood there shaking for a minute, heart racing wild in my chest, trying to make sense of the face and scream that replayed over in my mind. I checked all the windows and doors twice that night, making sure nothing followed me back from the forest's edge. But ever since that night, whenever I stayed home alone, I'd feel watched and uneasy in broad daylight. I'd also hear footsteps on the porch, and my garden furniture was moved around on several occasions. I have no clue what that white face with dark eyes could have been, or why it seemed to stalk me with those ongoing signs around my place. So if anyone knows what lurked there in the German forest or how to make it stop, I would love to hear your thoughts. I was driving home from work late one night. It must have been around 10:30 p.m., overcast with a little fog sometime in late fall. My route took me off the highway and through a farming area with thick trees on the left and fields on the right. The road was really straight, and my headlights reached far ahead. I was scanning for deer, which I often saw on this road. A ways ahead of me, I saw movement in the tree line, so I started to slow down. Instead of deer, a person slipped out the tree line. They didn't have a flashlight or cell phone light. They sauntered onto the road, and I slowed down even more. I couldn't see any clear features, but it was clearly a person with long legs and thin arms. I could see the bend of their knees, the swing of their arms. They were still pretty far ahead, about a halfway mark across the road. They swiveled their head to look in my direction, and in one fluid motion fell to all fours, and they took off in a loping, bounding run into the field. I was able to see them for a few seconds more, and it was fast. My dad's a hunter, so I asked him what he thought. He said it was probably a bear and showed me some videos, but it didn't look anything like a bear. It was too thin, too lanky, and I could clearly see the bends in its knees and elbows. It walked with the fluid confidence of a person, yet bounded away like a beast. It's been years now, and every once in a while I'll think about it and watch more videos of bears walking, and it still doesn't match. And I can't convince myself that's what it was. And yes, I've stopped taking that route home. I spent the extra 5 minutes to go the long way. I was about 14 years old in 2003 when I saw something in the woods that I had never been able to explain, no matter how much I turned it over in my head. So let me take you back. I grew up in western North Carolina among the Appalachian foothills, surrounded by thick woods, populated with deer, black bears, and coyotes. So those areas held nothing exotic like primates running around free, just the usual wildlife I knew from years spent near my house. That was when one afternoon I walked through a patch of woods not far from home. It was a spot I had been back to plenty of times without thinking twice about it. It was not deep wilderness at all, just one of those semi-rural wooded areas tucked behind someone's house along the edge of town. And that's when I got that gut feeling that I was being watched, cutting through me. I scanned the trees slowly, eyes moving branch to branch under the afternoon light filtering down. And that was when I saw it crouched on a thick branch, maybe 20 to 25 feet up, clear against the leaves and bark. The best way to describe it would be an orangutan-lemur hybrid, with long arms, a compact body, and a sort of hunched posture. The limbs looked too long for its torso hanging there steady, the fur appearing dark, maybe reddish-brown or greyish through the cover. It's hard to pin down exactly in the dappled shade, so it was not shaped like a bear cub at all that I recognized from past sightings, and definitely not a raccoon scrambling around clumsily. That was when I focused on the face, clearest of all, not like a raccoon's muzzle or snout, like a fox prowling nearby, but more primate-like. with forward-facing eyes, staring down. It sat there watching me without moving a muscle, locked in place as our eyes met. That was when it moved without warning. I do not mean it climbed down slowly towards me. It launched sideways through the trees fast, arm over arm swinging, but more controlled and efficient than any monkey I'd ever seen at a zoo or on TV. Within a few seconds it had moved right through the canopy above, disappearing completely from view without a trace left behind. There were no crushing branches shaking down like a bear would cause, and I stood there trying to convince myself I misidentified something ordinary in the adrenaline rush. That's when I thought of a juvenile bear, perhaps blending into the leaves. But I had seen both plenty of times around the foothills and knew that this was not the case. So for the next few years I kept half expecting an article about someone's escaped exotic pet turning up, since North Carolina folk keep weird animals sometimes even out in rural spots. I never found anything like reports or chatter about it anywhere after searching for it, and I quietly shelved it in my brain as that weird thing I once saw. Until a few years down the line, I was listening to an episode of the podcast Lore during a drive, hearing them mention pugwidges from Algonquin folklore out of nowhere. The description talked about small upright beings living in wooded areas, watching people from trees, throwing rocks sometimes, and disappearing quickly when spotted. I actually paused the episode right there because chills hit me hard from how close it matched. Still, I did not jump straight to that, as that was what I saw back then, not claiming folklore proved real or anything like that. But the watching from the trees part struck me immediately, uncomfortably close to what locked eyes with me that afternoon. Fast forward to a few months ago when, for reasons I cannot really justify even now, I went back to that same patch of wood after not stepping foot in there for years. I was older by then, figured I would probably feel silly for getting creeped out by shadows in those trees as a kid. I was maybe 10 minutes walking familiar ground when something smacked me hard in the shoulder out of nowhere. That was when I realized it was not a branch falling loose above, but a small rock thrown with real force that stung and hit my shirt. I looked up immediately, scanning the branches, and about 30 feet away, partially behind a tree, I saw a small outline standing there, short, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall if I guessed, thin frame half hidden, but enough to know it was not a deer or person messing around. That's when it moved. Just like years earlier, the second it seemed to register I was looking straight at it, it darted off low and quick behind trees in seconds. I did not chase after it into the brush or call out wandering, and I didn't stick around even a minute longer than I needed to, and was gone. I left that patch of woods straight away, heading back to familiar ground without looking over my shoulder once. A past co-worker and friend of mine called Ralph was on vacation visiting family on the island of Puerto Rico. One day while walking down a sidewalk bordering a busy 2-lane highway, something very odd occurred. The layout is important, so picture this. A highway running straight through a small valley, with large hills rising steeply on each side, like a river, cutting through a low mountain range. People were walking up and down the hillside, going about their day. As Ralph strolled along the sidewalk, he began to notice cars slowing down, then stopping entirely. Pedestrians slowed down too, until, most surprisingly, this woman walking very close to him, talking on her cell phone, just froze in place mid-step, mid-sentence, completely still. He looked around, thinking he was losing his mind, and realized everything was frozen in time. Every car, every person. The whole scene looked like a photograph, everything, except him. Then, atop of the hillside, a hole appeared in the air, It didn't belong there, a void or gateway of some kind floating just above the ground. Ralph said it looked like the inside of a volcano spewing fire and black smoke. Suddenly, something leaped out. It shot down the hillside so fast it looked like lightning weaving in, out, and between the now stationary people. But sometimes it didn't go around them. It physically moved them aside, shoving them out of its path like obstacles, only for them to snap back into place a moment later. Ralph went slack-jawed and without thinking, started pointing at it. The entity reached the bottom of the hill and stopped right in front of him, exactly where the woman on her phone had been standing. She was now suspended mid-air about 2 feet off the ground, but shifted slightly from side to side. Her movements slowed with an unnatural crawl, like someone had turned a time dial all the way down. The entity itself was translucent, short, and skinny in stature, with a giant light bulb-shaped head, like classic alien depictions, but an even larger cranium. Its two big eyes had vertical slits for pupils, like a snake's, along with two vertical slits where a nose would be, and a horizontal slit for a mouth. Catfish-like tentacles hung from below the nose slits, draping over the mouth, while its very long arms ended in extended fingers and hands that dragged on the ground. It had gigantic feet, and strangely enough, it was wearing clothes, oversized red shoes like clown shoes, khaki chino pants rolled up to the ankle, a white button-up shirt with cuffs rolled, and a baseball cap perched atop its massive head. As Ralph stood there pointing, the entity spoke to him telepathically in English, which he found odd, as they were in Puerto Rico. It said, "I see that you can see me." And Ralph blurted out, "What are you?" The being did a strange bow and replied, "I am a refugee." Immediately after, it jumped completely, clearing the highway in one bound, and shot like lightning up the opposite hillside. The moment it was out of sight, time snapped back to normal, and everything resumed. Cars honked, people walked and talked, the woman on her phone kept going as if nothing had happened. Ralph has never seen it since. I lived in a small town called Bastrop in Louisiana, sharing a place with my cousin and his wife, where life moved slow in Morehouse Parish, with not much to do besides driving back roads like we had done thousands of times before. I had never told anyone about this outside of the people with me that night, or my best friend who later claimed to have seen something similar on a different date, that I did not know about until I described my experience to him in detail. So that made the whole thing hit even harder when I finally shared it, confirming we were not alone in what crossed our paths out there. So one night in 2015, we finished clearing a church that we looked after regularly, and it was around 2 a.m. when we piled into my cousin's 1990 GMC Sierra, a single cab 4x4 that rattled along those familiar roads. We decided to ride the back roads home as always, cruising slowly under the dark sky, with me and him talking steadily in the front seats. Next, his wife had fallen asleep in the middle seat between us, head resting against the window while we listened to Nirvana playing from the stereo. That was when we turned onto a paved road about 5 miles outside of town, headlights cutting through the thick Louisiana night as we came around a sharp curve ahead. So right there in the middle of the road, something caught the beams that we had never seen before, stopping us solid in our tracks before we could even process it. Now, I was an avid hunter who spent all hours in the woods at night and day. Plus, time in the army had toughened me up, but nothing prepared me for how freaked out I felt by what stood there in front of us. I saw something dead lying in the road, some animal carcass torn open, and hunched over it was a creature eating away. That was when it looked up at us, about 2.5 to 3 foot tall, as it knelt there over whatever it fed on, red eyes glowing bright in the glare like embers burning in the dark. My cousin hit the brakes hard, truck skidding a bit on the pavement while his wife stirred awake. Then it stood up so fast, it seemed like no time had passed at all, stretched to 7 or 8 feet tall in one fluid motion, and I saw its skin, pitch black, looking like a bat skin stretched tight but darker. Next, in one swoop, it leapt into the air off the road, wings opening wide, as it flew straight into the woods on the side, moving easily over 50 miles an hour through the trees. So we sat there frozen for a moment, engine idling, while Nirvana was fading out on the stereo, all three of us staring at the empty spot where it had vanished to in the shadows. I turned to my cousin, asked if he saw the same red eyes I did, and he nodded quickly without a word. His wife then gripped the seat tight, wide awake now, whispering that she caught the whole thing from her spot in the middle as it took off flying. Then, we drove off slowly from there, avoiding that curve for weeks after and sticking to the main roads even if it took longer. The image stuck with me hard. That black-skinned thing standing over the dead animal, the red eyes locked on our truck before the wings snapped open and carried it away. That was when I realized my army time and hunting nights in the Louisiana woods never showed me anything close to that speed or shape. Ever since that night in 2015, I stayed cynical about paranormal stuff, but I knew exactly what I saw with my cousin and his wife, plus my best friend's story matching later on. I know there's something that lives out there, but what it is, I can't say for certain. Back in the early 2000s, one of my uncle's friends, who flew small aircrafts for a living, told him about something strange he saw while cruising over the Cascade Range in Washington state on a clear day. He had been flying near Mount St. Helens just for fun, enjoying the view with nothing unusual going on around him at first. That was when he noticed something huge, circling slow near the crater up there, catching his eye against the bright sky and rocky slopes below. At first he thought it was perspective messing with him from that height, maybe a trick of distance making things look off as they often did up in the air. The longer he watched it, turning steadily on those thermals, the less sense it made to his experienced eyes scanning the horizon. He described it to my uncle as a massive, black bird-shaped thing gliding out there, not like an eagle with its familiar spread or a condor soaring wide. That was when he used the words pterodactyl-shaped exactly, long wings stretched out narrow, body slim and pulled back, big enough that, from his distance, it did not look much smaller than his own plane cutting through the clouds. That freaked him out hard, he later said. It felt wrong to see something that size riding the warm air currents over a volcano, like it belonged up there watching everything below. He cut his flight short then, turned the plane around and headed back to base earlier than planned, without another loop around the peak. My aunt always loved folklore and weird history growing up around those parts, and that was when she worked at a local museum archive back then, so naturally she went digging through records for anything about giant birds tied to the region after hearing this story firsthand, and she ended up reading various indigenous legends from the Pacific Northwest. Stories of enormous storm birds living high in the mountains that appeared before natural disasters would shake the ground. Next, she fell down a rabbit hole about thunderbird myths from several tribes around there, massive creatures linked to thunder and warnings from above the peaks. Half joking over dinner one night, she started calling whatever he saw Ridgeback, giving it a name that stuck around our family talks for years. And then about 5 months later, Mount St. Helens had a noticeable eruptive event. Not the big 1980s blast everyone remembered, but enough ash and rubble to make headlines across Washington. So my aunt swore up and down it could not be a coincidence, tying those dots together, the black shape circling months before the mountain stirred under pressure again. Fast forward a few years when my cousin and I went out the Washington coast near the ocean shores, walking the beach and messing around under a clear sky stretching forever inland. That was when way off towards the haze, if you squinted hard, you could make out Mount Rainier rising sharply above everything else dominating the view. My younger cousin pointed out suddenly and said there is a hawk circling there, pulling us all to look up from the sand and waves around our feet. And we saw something way out towards the mountain, a distance so far it should have been tiny against the blue. But whatever moved stood clear and bold no matter how many miles we sat away from it. It looked enormous even from the beach, way too big to be a hawk. And the wings appeared long and slightly angled, gliding smoothly. Even at that range, it did not match a normal bird's silhouette cutting the sky. My aunt did not even hesitate watching the drift, and just said that it was Ridgeback. We kind of laughed at first, thinking she joked around like that always with her stories, but none of us could explain what showed so plainly against the distant haze up high, blending into the clouds until nothing stood out anymore from our spot or the shore. About 8 or 9 months later, Mount Rainier had a series of seismic events with ash emissions shutting down parts around it for a while, though thankfully, nothing catastrophic happened. A few years ago, I was living down the shore in Point Pleasant, working seasonal jobs, and enjoying the quiet that comes after the summer tourists disappear. It was October, and one afternoon I drove down to Atlantic City just to get out for the day. I stayed later than I meant to, and by the time I started heading back north, I was exhausted. Instead of pushing through the drive, I decided to grab a cheap motel off Route 9 in Waretown, right where the Pine Barrens press up against the marshland in Ocean County. If you've ever been through that stretch at night, you know it feels different from places like Seaside Heights or LBI. There are longer gaps between buildings and fewer streetlights, and the trees seem to crowd the road. And the motel I picked looked worn down and mostly empty. The pool was covered for the season, and the patio furniture was stacked and strapped, and only one dim exterior light flicked near the office. The couple running the place said they were from a Central Asian country, but I can no longer recall which. They were polite but quiet, and the whole check-in felt subdued. When I get to my room, my stomach dropped. The carpet, for a start, felt damp under my feet, and the bedspread had a stiff, overwashed look that made you question everything. I thought I saw a small, dark speck move near the mattress seam. That was enough for me. I grabbed towels from the bathroom, laid them out in the tub, and decided I would rather sleep there than risk waking up covered in bites. It wasn't comfortable, but I figured it was only for one night. Or sometime around 2 a.m. I woke up to a loud crash that shook the bathroom door. For a moment, I thought something had fallen in the room. But then it came again, an explosive full-force slam that rattled the side door leading to the pool area. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't someone testing the handle. It sounded like something was hurling its entire weight against the door, and the frame shuddered with the impact. At first, I tried rationalize it. Maybe drunk teenagers had hopped the fence and were messing around near the covered pool. But the pool was closed for the season, wrapped tightly in a heavy tarp, and there hadn't been more than one other car in the lot when I arrived. Besides, the force behind those blows didn't sound like kids playing a prank. It was too deliberate. Then I heard a sound that made all the hairs on my arms stand on end. It started high and sharp, almost like distant children laughing, but it twisted mid-note into something guttural and animalistic. The closest comparison I can make is that it sounded like laughter forced through a throat built for growling. It hit the door again harder this time, and I genuinely thought the glass would break. My body reacted before my brain caught up. I grabbed my keys, and rushed out the main room door into the exterior corridor. The moment my feet hit the concrete walkway, the pounding stopped. Not fade out, but stopped completely. And the silence was so sudden it felt unreal. There were no retreating footsteps or splashing from the pool area, no voices laughing or whispering that would indicate it be teenagers. Nothing. I stood there for at least a minute, heart hammering, staring towards the dark shape in the pine barrens behind the property. The tree line was a solid black wall under the moonlight. It felt like something could just be standing inside watching, but giving me nothing to see in return. Eventually I walked towards the front office, half expecting to find someone outside, but the lot was empty. The next morning I mentioned what happened to one of the owners. I expected him to dismiss or blame it on the wind, but he paused and said, "Sometimes things come from the woods." He chose not to elaborate, and I chose not to press him. Later at a gas station down the road, some guy I ended up chatting to, who was working near a warehouse nearby, said that they'd experienced similar things, and insinuated that it might be the Jersey Devil. I haven't stayed anywhere near the Pine Barrens since. This happened to me about 3-ish years ago now, and to this day I don't know what I saw. I always figured it was a weird-looking animal, but it was definitely humanoid. I hope no one thinks I'm crazy, because where it happened considering how many people were around, but ever since this encounter, I've never hung out around natural parks or semi-natural places where you have to put up your high beams at night. I get the feeling I'm being watched. Anyway, this happened near the Santa Monica Mountains near Los Angeles or Malibu. I kept bugging my boyfriend at the time that I wanted to see shooting stars. This was in late summertime, and obviously living in LA, it's always full of smog and light pollution, and you have to drive a minimum 2 hours to find a good spot. But we wanted to stay near and, well, picked those mountains, since they had good reviews and I've been there before, no problem. And I wasn't the only one with the same idea, because there was a meteor shower. So, in the near entrance of the park, some people already had their telescopes up. My dumbass introverted idea was to go past these people, so we could be alone. It was done, yes, past the parking lot and pretty much looked like a trail. He agreed and we picked a lonely spot. We did see another couple stay near, but that's it. The walk was less than a mile to the spot we were at, and that couple disappeared towards some rock formation nearby. I laid my blanket down, and the meteor shower did not disappoint, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up, and I got goosebumps and the feeling of being watched. I turned around, and nothing. My boyfriend kept telling me to calm down and that I was just imagining things, especially because we basically illegally parked, and just like everyone else did, I didn't want my car impounded, so he excused it on my paranoia. But I felt like we were being stalked, and I just had the most horrible feeling. So we were sitting for about 10 minutes, and I couldn't take it anymore. I said I wanted to go home because something was indeed watching us. A single coyote. Now coyotes are tiny, but they do hunt in packs from what I knew, and it was alone. It went into a bush, I assumed because I lost sight of it, but the horrible feeling was still there. And on top of that, my boyfriend kept cracking jokes, saying I was just paranoid and afraid of a little coyote. But respectfully, I didn't want to be bitten. I started speed walking towards the car, and my boyfriend kept making fun of me, asking me to slow down, and I turned around. And it was at that moment I caught a glimpse of it. Walking towards the spot, there were street lamps towards the trail, and this thing was avoiding the lamps. But next to it was the coyote from earlier, and it stopped. The thing was hyperfixated, face smushed to the ground, where I was standing earlier. I didn't have a good glimpse of it, till it stood under a light, and turned to its side. And that is when the dread hit me. I wanted to start running, but with flip-flops, I was definitely going to fall flat on my face, and my boyfriend wasn't helping. He started calling this thing out, saying it was a dog or a messed up coyote, but once it stood under the light, his laughter died. I also noticed that, you know how at night you can hear crickets as well as bugs? When this coyote appeared, all the sounds of the night switched off. This thing, I was able to compare it with the coyote, was way bigger. No fur, with grey and pale skin. It almost looked human, but down on all fours. Some details were off. It had no snout, and from what I could make out, had no ears that were anything like a coyote's. It looked human, but not really. It had weird legs like a dog or a cat, and the fingers were abnormally huge, skinny, long fingers with a huge back spine bones sticking out, and a stomach so tucked in like a hungry dog. And it started to follow us while having the face smushed into the ground, quickly walking towards us. We started to jog, trying to be quiet, and I was trying hard not to cry because that thing looked like the monster from Pan's Labyrinth. Once we reached the trailhead, we noticed the cops were kicking people out of the area, and I was relieved. We got into my car, and I didn't speak for the whole ride back. We had nightmares about that thing for a week straight. I told my brothers about it, and family, and some said it was a nawal, a witch from my culture that transforms into animals, and others say a skinwalker or nightcrawler. Whatever it was, all I know is I'm never going out at night into wilderness parks, especially with someone who has the survival skills of a turnip. Every time I'm out at natural parks with friends or families for trips or a hike, I catch a glimpse of a coyote here and there, and they'll just stare at me. And for my own safety, I think I'll stop going altogether to avoid any trouble. My family has lived in Austin their whole lives. A few years back, they moved into a nice house on the Colorado River. And flash forward to a few weeks ago, things started to get weird. First happening. My dad and mum love feeding the ducks. They're getting old, and they started getting a large congregation. I want to say about 3 weeks ago was when a few of the ducks started being killed and dragged to their back door. They thought it must have been a neighbor's cat because it had teeth marks, but the neighbor said their cat had died a month ago or so before. The second event happened one night when my mum said she heard the sound of one of their ducks being mauled, so she got my dad to run out to scare the thing off. But sadly it was too dark or far off into the water for them to see. However, they both swear they saw green, glowing eyes. The latest event is my mum swears that something started rearranging all her lawn decorations. The houses along the river have backyard lawns that are very well kept for the passing boats and tourists, so she has a bunch of gnomes and flamingos and whatnot. Keep Austin weird, I know. Well, it apparently started out with little things moved here and there, but quickly ended up with all her decorations being thrown into a heap. I've since visited and can confirm the lawn, and have also seen the photos of the ducks. This can't be a person because they would hear a boat approach and have motion sensor lights which have failed to go off. Could this be a cryptid? Has anyone heard of a water monster near Austin or Central Texas? I really would like to get to the bottom of this mystery. I was on a ferry for a school softball trip in 2014 when I was 18 years old, heading through the San Juan Islands in Washington during a late May evening around 11 p.m. If you've ever been that far north in late spring, you know it does not get properly dark until really late, with the sun basically dragging its feet about setting behind the horizon. So a bunch of us, maybe 9 or 10 in total, had snuck up to the outer deck to watch the water, smoke, and act like dumb teenagers without adult supervision. That was when we stood there, feeling the cold air bite a bit, though not unbearably against our skin, while the water stayed calm enough to see the ferry wake clearly churn behind us in the dim light. Next, someone pointed out dorsal fins cutting through the wake, sharp shapes rising and falling with the waves as we all leaned over the railing to look closer. So we saw orcas out there pacing alongside, which honestly felt pretty normal in that area since they all showed up a lot during those trips through the island. I knew what orca fins looked like from seeing them before. Tall, smooth, black triangles, usually 4 to 6 feet high on adult males, with clean, straight edges slicing the surface perfectly. That was when we counted maybe 10 to 15 of them weaving in and out of the wake, a few smaller ones mixed in the group as they kept pace with the ferry for a good while. So we tried taking pictures on our phones, but the devices sucked back then, and the light faded low already, making everything blurry despite our best efforts to capture them. Next, it took a good 30 minutes for the whole pod to pass by completely, their fins slipping under one by one until nothing moved in the water behind us anymore. That was when we started to sober up from the night air, feeling the cold settle deeper, and talk about heading inside to warm up before anyone caught us out there. So we lingered a moment longer, scanning the open water that stretched flat ahead, when one of the younger girls spoke up quietly and said there was another one coming. I turned with everyone else, expecting a stray orca fin to break through like the others had done before, leaning forward over the rail to spot it in the faint glow. At first, that was exactly what it looked like. One dorsal fin cutting clean through the surface about 20 or 30 feet off the side of the ferry. Then another rose right behind it. Then one more. Then 2 others popping up in quick succession, and we all were frozen watching. So those were wrong from the start. Taller by far than any orca fin I recognized, jagged and uneven instead of smooth, some looking torn or chipped along the edges harshly. That was when I realized they were not spaced out like separate animals swimming independently, but lined up in 2 rough rows, running parallel across whatever moved beneath them steadily. Next, we could just barely see the shape of its back under the surface, lit faintly by the ferry light spilling over the railing. I saw more of those spikes break the surface one after another, as it kept coming without pause, easily 8 to 10 feet each, some leaning slightly while others looked scarred. That's when the body underneath kept going long past what made sense for a single whale. This dark mass stretching out with no end in sight. No one said a word among the 10 of us standing there. The deck had now gone silent. Whatever was down there should not exist. I knew we had all turned earlier to watch a whale pass like normal, but now faced something that clearly was not a whale at all, moving so differently from anything familiar. It showed no visible blow spouting up, no rolling body arching through, no fluke breaking the surface to signal a dive ahead. That was when this long, dark mass, with rows of jagged dorsal spikes, sliced through steady like a saw blade gliding parallel, staying alongside the ferry for a solid 6 or 7 minutes that felt endless in the cold. So based on how long it took for the last of the spikes to pass our position, I figured it had to be huge out there, 60 feet at least or maybe longer. Next, I noticed it followed the exact path of the orcas that went by 30 to 40 minutes earlier, not cruising at random, but tracking steadily in the same direction. That was when I felt like it was hunting out there, orcas being top predators that feared little, yet this thing trailed their pod completely comfortably. Someone tried getting a photo in that moment, fumbling with their phone against the dark, but by then the lighting had failed completely, with only the ferry windows spilling faint glows over the rails. Eventually, the last of those spikes slipped beneath the surface, water going flat again without a splash. I don't know what kind of creature that was. I guess it qualifies as a cryptid, but if anyone has any info regarding it, I'd love to hear it. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. It really does mean a hell of a lot for you to listen to these stories, so thank you for being here. And if you would like to support long-form creators like myself, liking, subbing, pressing the bell go a seriously long way, and it would be appreciated, so thank you guys. I'd like to extend my appreciation to all my lovely members and patrons whose names are on screen right now. For signing up, they get a bunch of cool perks, and if you're interested in finding out what those are, links down below. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.